Is this for real, Law? They haven't even started yet. But yeah, Audi's already paused development on parts of their 2026 car. But why, though? It's got something to do with Ferrari. But yes, why has Mattia Binotto somehow out-voweled James Vowles in stopping development this early? Why have they wound down certain parts of their first F1 car, dubbed the R26, and instead of focusing on 2027 and 2028? As I said, it might have something to do with Ferrari. Yeah, that Ferrari. Because the ties between Sauber and Ferrari go very, very deep. In fact, almost 30 years deep, to the point where they were so like that, Michael Schumacher tested a Sauber as some kind of freebie as part of their arrangement. And ever since then, Sauber and Ferrari have been actually tight partners, save for that, awkward teenage phase when they became BMW, but that's for another video. But yeah, sure enough, things are indeed winding down between the two of them, and that includes the implementation of the drivetrain components supplied by Ferrari, Sauber being, of course, the historic B team and customer of the operation. And what do you mean by drivetrain? Well, that is basically another way of describing everything to do with the power unit and how it actually, helps the car drive in a forward direction. So here are the words of Audi's chief technical officer to explain why things are happening the way they are, and why it might not be the cause of sounding the alarm bells, but just making you think a little bit differently. Ahem. Development of the 2026 drivetrain has concluded, and we're already focusing on 2027 and 2028. Development of components truly never stops in Formula 1, but considering the limited amount of data available to us from the current Sauber and Ferrari setup, and the 2026 regulation changes, we're looking past our first year now. In short, Audi's decided not to go chasing year one glory. As far as I'm concerned, good. There have been so many teams in the past that have tried to do so, and they've either failed spectacularly, and we mock them to this day, or worse, we've forgotten about them entirely, and you just think, were they even a thing? Instead, they're acting like a serious works team, with eyes firmly set on 2030. That's the year they plan to fight for titles, said by the Audi CEO himself, so there isn't any kind of disconnect. The road to that, yeah, it could be long, could be shorter, but it's not going to be instant. And that fills me with so much relief that Audi is showing a degree of seriousness about their F1 affair, instead of them thinking this is going to be some kind of money spinner. It was the vibe I was getting from 2022 when they first arrived, and no one was quite sure whether or not they were actually committed to it, or it was just down to the fact that this seemed convenient, and that the roadmap regarding power units was somewhat in step in what they wanted to do. And we all know about all of the drama, the vagueness, the power struggles we saw with Andreas Seidel. VW Group getting a little bit jittery could still happen. But right now, it seems remarkably solid, and I am so happy about that. Last week's presser with the R26 concept, it got people talking. After so long, people just thinking, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. Well, we saw it. But yeah, the whole thing with the chief technical officer mentioning Ferrari and the setup they have with Sauber is something worth thinking about. And what actually goes on in a customer relationship with a team and their supplier? What kind of information is shared between them? Or in this case, not shared with them. Almost like they are given a Lego piece supplied by Ferrari, they're expected to slot it into the car, and then when they are no longer partners, it gets taken out again, and you know nothing about it. So there'd be only so much you could learn about energy deployment and packaging from a car whose drivetrain is provided by somebody else and you're not going to have access to anymore, it being kept a closely guarded secret. And the intel about next year will go over to Cadillac because they'll be customers to Ferrari for the first few years. Under next year's rules, the power unit you manage to come up with is effectively the foundation you build upon for the next few years. Sure, you can develop the engine again after the practice being frozen for a while at the insistence of Red Bull and their powertrains unit, but you would ideally like to get off on the right foot. Instead of having to catch up over a couple of years. I'm looking at you, Honda, and I also blame Ron Dennis and McLaren for that. The whole size zero thing, the packaging like a Coke bottle, there was so many demands from McLaren and Honda vastly underestimating, even with an extra year to develop their car. Thankfully, we are not seeing that with Audi. And about that, we actually got more information. I shared it with you in my preview and predictions video yesterday, that there is somewhat good news from Neuberg, that the first iteration of the power unit is basically finished. Mattia Binotto saying that they're basically now just fettling it here and there to make sure it's not likely to go bang at the first time of asking. That maybe they've got the performance down to somewhere where they're actually quite pleased with and could mirror the uptick in performance we've seen from Sauber this year, as well as cases of fragility from that machine. Finding the performance first and then walking it back to find the right reliability. Because seriously, the uptick of Sauber this year is not to be underestimated. They are still in contention for 6th place this year, matching what they were able to do as Alfa Romeo in the first year of this regulation cycle. So I think all of the lessons they've learnt this year have been very, very important for next year. That reliability is the biggest thing that they need to push in order to make a very good leap forward. It's a very good logical understanding, instead of just going, power! Because, my friend, this is not the days where you could have qualifying engines, because that was a thing not that long ago, where you could build an engine, make it go absolutely ballistic around the track for a few laps, just for an hour-long session, and then you just ditched it. Yeah. It was that wasteful. So if you couple up what Binotto said with what the Chief Technical Officer Stefan Dreher said, it all lines up. That they're already moving key people onto the second phase of the regulation cycle, the next generation of Audi power unit, the time when there's usually a rapid growth spurt after you've got your bearings down, which it seems like Audi has regarding the engine. It's going to be very important next year for that to be the case. And what we get for pre-season testing, because there's going to be 9 days of it, is something that will be robust enough, because the last thing that Audi wants to have are days when they're locked in the garage trying to repair the engine. It'll be like what we saw with McLaren in 2015, where they barely got out there. Quite frankly, if they end up clocking in not the least amount of laps, that'll be a triumph in of itself, because it'll be normal. Audi acting like a normal team. And this all ties in very neatly in what Audi's roadmap is meant to be, and what we've heard from my estranged Italian father with the similar hairdo. That they are not seeking to be year one heroes, that they're not hoping to be right up there at the top of the grid, and anything else would be justification for VW to pull the plug. This is not a Toyota, thankfully. This is not them just throwing money at the problem and expecting immediate success. Audi describing this as some kind of 3-step plan broken up into every couple of years. They will be starting off as competitors, then contenders, and then, ideally, champions. The 3 Cs. Only then will they actually be able to gun for world championships and consistent wins. So, Nico Hulkenberg fans, you might want to sit down a little bit. It might be a while until your German boy can actually go and win championships. You know, unless he goes over to Fernando and asks what he's been drinking to make him so consistent, even though he's approaching his mid-40s. Who knows? We might see Hulkenberg break the 400 race barrier, because he's German. He'll be operating with a German team. This will be the dream. He'll have gotten to drive and represent 2 German makers in top-tier motorsport, not forgetting his ties with Porsche and Le Mans. Yeah, he's a VW boy. So yes, Audi doing all of this is exactly what I wanted to hear. That Audi, after years of speculation, is now sitting down and acting like a proper F1 team, and rekindling, maybe, finally, some interest from German fans in Formula 1 again. You've got Adidas representing 2 teams in Formula 1 with their apparel. You've got 2 German automakers in Formula 1. One actually starting to turn itself around and favourites to win the title. You've got Nico Hulkenberg back in the game. So everything is hopefully pinning to maybe the German Grand Prix coming back round again, ideally at the Hockenheimring. Nürburgring, maybe, but I just want the German Grand Prix back. It just feels weird that it's not there, like the French Grand Prix isn't there. And yeah, Binotto's main plan is not to chase lap times. It's to basically survive everything that the off-season hurls at them, meaning that they can arrive at Australia and not come away with it with a double retirement. So basically their goal is just to finish Australia without the engine going bang or something else going bang. If a DNF comes about and it's down to a crash, and it's nothing to do with the drivetrain or anything else mechanical, then that's mainly on the driver or drivers around them which may have caused the accident. That isn't uncontrollable. So Audi, they're trying to control the controllable. And remember, we've got 24 races to go to, and if you've already busted one of your engines already, you've only got 2 more left before you then have to take on other power units, and then you get grid drops. And yeah, if they are near the back, it won't be nearly as bad as it might have been, say, if they were at a front runner, but it's still not something nice, and it's not really a good rep to have when you're a brand new power unit supplier. If you want to eventually start having customers, you want to start off on the right foot, make a good impression. You could also waste up spending valuable development tokens on just trying to improve the reliability that ideally you should have been sorting out before you went racing, meaning that you can ideally work on trying to make the car that little bit faster. And let's not forget the reporting and the rumours that Audi, power unit-wise in terms of the internal combustion engine, was only maybe 30-35 horsepower behind Mercedes, the expected favourites. That's not too bad. So it may not matter that initially they're not the fastest or second fastest or third fastest. So long as they can make it to the finish, they might be able to accrue points for just being at the end of the race when they meet the checkered flag. So thank Bernie we've not got some glory hunters. And all of this is pinning to me that what Audi is doing here, buying up Sauber lock, stock and barrel, is a legitimate sign they want to become their own Formula 1 team, instead of just rebadging Sauber and then, if something goes wrong, just leave Sauber hung out to dry like BMW did for 2010. We're sort of seeing Sauber's swan song with their Vegas livery they announced right after my predictions video. The final lap livery, they called it. Their own way of having a send-off to their sponsor stake, but also calling time on their original identity. Although personally, I would have preferred a tribute livery to Sauber's first one from 1993. All black, white wing flaps, and then having the tag on the engine cover, concept by Peter Sauber, instead of concept by Mercedes-Benz, because they've got nothing to do with them. Simple, but poetic. Aside from that, Audi is not going to be just restricted to the likes of Hinwil, even though they were able to secure a major coup and get a boost in the cost cap to counter in the fact that salaries in Switzerland due to worker laws do have to be higher than they would be in other countries. And also, they have got two other bases to consider. They've got the likes of Neuburg for Audi, and they've now got their Bicester facility. So it's sort of aping what Mercedes has been doing with having 3 bases of operations. We all know about Brackley, of course, but then there's Brixworth to consider for the power unit development, Mercedes HPP, and then of course there's Stuttgart, where Mercedes is based. And also, them being a works operation and having these many facilities means they have control of the entire widget. And even though there is the talk of active aero, and Pirelli has mentioned that it will be important, this is going to be far more dependent on power unit deployment than it would have been under the ground effect era. Yes, Alpine might beg to chime in, but let's be real. You want to have a good engine, enough grunt, to make sure that you can deploy your MARM very appropriately and suitably. I don't think any teams want to mess with their moms. And seriously, having a works team operation is a very good enticement for any driver out there wishing to find some kind of leadership credentials once it comes time for Hulkenberg to retire, and if Bortoletto gets snapped up by somebody else. I mean, who knows what may happen over at McLaren, but yeah, I'm just going to skirt around that for now. But that kind of integration is serious. It's what got Pierre Gasly to sign on Alpine's dotted line. And then just a year later, that works perk was also signed away on Alpine's other dotted line by Toto Wolff. But it's not like Audi is resigning themselves to being midfield at best for a while. Audi's leadership has repeatedly said they're not entering F1 just to make up the numbers. They nailed a specific target to the wall. Jonathan Wheatley, their new team principal, and Binotto, they've repeated this consistently. Whether they actually hit that mark, I do not know. But the important is that they have some kind of internal plan, and that their messaging to the world has been nothing short of consistent. I have not heard any pundit out there going, well, somebody there said that, and then somebody there said that, and they don't exactly add up. There's been a consistent declaration of what their goals are, and that is really important for any brand new team. Because if you do get a mismatch, then you've got some kind of flawed system, and in turn, you could end up with a flawed car, where one part of it may bring the side down. And what would a video talking about what will happen in the rest of the decade be without mentioning Max Verstappen? Because, yeah, Audi has gone there and has plainly said, we want Max Verstappen to drive our car. This coming from Jonathan Wheatley, who's worked with Verstappen, because he has the experience of working with Max, his father Jos, and his manager Raymond. That maybe should the time arrive and Max is looking for another team to work with, or a project, or a jump to a title-fighting machine, because Max will only be 33 by then, he'll still have a few more years left in him. So to build a car that is fighting at the front around that time when Max's contract either at Red Bull or somewhere else could be up for renewal, you could have at least a shot at tempting Verstappen at that time. But would he actually do that? I'm not so sure, so I would have to get the foam of doubt out for this one. But I will not underestimate the relationship that Jonathan Wheatley has with Max Verstappen, because it goes way, way back. And it's been very important in Max Verstappen's establishment of being one of the sport's modern racing legends. He knows which buttons to press to convince Max to maybe come and join, or at least entertain the idea of representing Audi. And let's not forget Audi's established motorsport pedigree in other categories. And when they do focus in, they go all in. Let's not forget their prowess when it comes to rallying in the desert with Dakar, their affiliations with Carlos Sainz Sr. They know how to commit. Their Le Mans pedigree in any sport that they have committed to, really 100%, they have seen success. And F1 could be yet another one of those. It might just take a little bit of time. But hopefully by the time they do, Max might come a-knockin'. Max may appreciate that dedication, but it all depends on variables no one can see yet. Like how strong Red Bull's powertrain actually winds up being, the politics over Red Bull slowly becoming anti-political, and how quickly Audi progresses themselves and turns the heads of other elite drivers. What you can say, though, is targeting Max is a very cute target for Audi to have. Made by a man who is deeply respected by the Dutchman, this isn't made by some kind of rando who has no affiliation with Max Verstappen whatsoever. And I'm quite sure that Jonathan's not going to constantly say next year, saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if Max was here? He's not going to be flirting like Toto. And besides, you'd only name drop Verstappen if you know you could develop a car that could actually tempt him. On top of that, they've got plenty of financial security and big names associated with them. When Binotto was announced as the leader of the project, I was like, ooh. And when Jonathan Wheatley was announced as team principal, I was like, ooh. And then, as we saw with Bortoleto and Hulkenberg, synchronizing so well, the dynamic between them, one of the most wholesome on the grid, I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa! That and the team has managed to ape many other F1 teams in having Middle Eastern backing. Remember the Qatari Investment Authority having a 30% stake in them. And something that I read in Philip Horton's book, The Grand Prix Year, was alluding to the idea that Qatar is very much playing catch-up with all of the other Middle Eastern countries who have a finger in many Formula One pies. What with Montalacat, with McLaren, Aramco and the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund wanting to get further into bed with Aston Martin, especially all the rumours surrounding that maybe with Aston Martin Lagonda, the car company, going private, that it might be then bought out by indeed that in particular investment fund. There is a lot of entertaining going on from various other countries within that region. And maybe those countries may be going, you're only investing 30%. I mean, that's still hundreds of millions less than us. It's still something worth noticing that this isn't some kind of thing run on some kind of purse that is this small. This has got a lot of investment going into it, not just from Audi. Sure, it is being built off of Sauber, who has a very long pedigree within Formula One, but it also has a reputation of being vastly underinvested in times when they've not been backed by big figures or have had some good times. Yeah, the BMW, they were kind of left out to dry. They spent years near the back. They rarely got above 6th place at best. So maybe with the right money and the right resources, they could have the ability to once again, in their late 90s, early 2000s way, in punching upwards. And now there's also Cadillac to consider, because they are effectively going to be Audi's main rival in that they are another team also coming in 2026, and most importantly, they are taking the Ferrari custom from Sauber and Audi. At first glance, their situation looks a lot easier. Next year, they'll have Ferrari power units, which Ferrari have been developing, as well as gearboxes. All the while, General Motors ramps up its own engine program for 2028 and 29. They got years to try and find references to pull from, as other teams have developed around them. Yes, they may have a similar situation in which Ferrari will keep a lid on various parts of their drivetrain, but hey, that's no biggie. Cadillac can still learn something in the middle of a regulation cycle, unlike Sauber, when that regulation is outgoing. So, early on, Cadillac may have the edge whilst Audi are having their teething troubles as being the full works operation. But I am not underestimating Cadillac's commitment, because the stuff I've seen from them has been nothing short of remarkable. Simulating whole Grand Prix on computers, them having their connections and Ferrari gifting some of their own TPC time in bringing out the 2023 Ferrari all in black around Imola with Checo at the wheel. That was really spicy in of itself. Both teams I'm really, really curious about, and I don't think they are going to be embarrassing at all. But I do think in the long term, Audi may prove to be the better bet, as long as what they're cooking ends up to be mwah. And besides, customer teams are always constrained in how far they can actually tailor their car around the engine. And by the time GM takes over that facet of the car, they'll have their own teething troubles to deal with. But for now, Cadillac will get the hardware and software supplied, but they will never dictate the overall development direction of the power unit. They'll be having to deal with what they get. And next year that will matter, because let's not forget what happened in 2020 when the Ferrari power unit was absolutely terrible. Ferrari went down, and Haas and Alfa Romeo went down with them. So yeah, Cadillac will be praying that Ferrari have at least got something good, but we have heard many times in the last few months of many people jumping ship from Ferrari's own divisions, including Wolf Zimmermann, who, as I said in a previous video, is not somebody to ignore. Somebody who was able to turn the turbo hybrid era for Ferrari all the way around and then being competitive again, as well as helping them turn things around after the 2019 fiasco. And funnily enough, Wolf Zimmermann is actually over at Audi, so, you know, just pay attention to that. But seriously, Zimmermann is only the highest profile addition. As I told you in a video a while back, Audi's been executing what feels like a slow-motion Ferrari raid, because there have been many ex-Ferrari employees who have found themselves working in either Neuberg or Hinwil. That this is a way of making you realise that, hey, Mattia Binotto probably had a lot of friends working in the back rooms and behind the scenes in the engine department over at Ferrari, and with Mattia Binotto being thrust into the role of team principal, most likely against his will, after the departure of the previous one, and actually doing a fairly good job, all things considering that it wasn't really part of his dream ambition for Ferrari, it might also be an act of revenge in maybe what happened regarding 2022. Now, I will get the spanner of speculation out for this little bit, but I do feel like Mattia was just yet another scapegoat for Ferrari. They had to pin the blame on somebody as to why Charles Leclerc's bid for the title in 2022 went so awry, and I can easily imagine that Charles had something to do with Mattia's exit and the installment of Fred. You all remember that picture of Mattia wagging his finger over at Charles? That might have been the turning point. So maybe now, having had some time to think and coming on as Audi's main man in terms of their F1 project, what we are seeing with Ferrari's brain drain might end up being Audi's brain trust. Yeah, essentially, the behind-the-scenes department of Audi will mirror Ferrari in the best ways, free from traditionalist culture and Italian stubbornness. Put all of this together and it's a really good sign that Audi's development is not bringing up red flags, that you look at this and think, oh no. But from what I'm seeing, this is a power unit program that is so far along that they feel comfortable in just focusing on reliability for the rest of their time before they actually go pre-season testing in January. That they've actually got something to work with as some kind of baseline and then focus on the next generation of power unit when they've actually got their bearings. Sort of in a similar way as to how Honda got their bearings together eventually once they had the time and investment put into it by the entire Red Bull group. That there may be peaks and plateaus and what have you, but we are not seeing Audi putting all of their eggs in one basket. The engine goes bang, no matter how good the performance is in qualifying, it's not going to matter if you can't secure points. If you're thinking that despite that they'd be challenging for wins in their first year, I'm sorry, you would be absolutely delusional. But them being contenders in a few years' time, I think that's entirely plausible. Especially if VW don't suddenly get the jitters and then pull the plug, because that, again, can still happen. And I'm quite certain that you're committed in watching another video of mine, which you can do so right here. I'm very sure you will like it, so just gotta go and have a glass of water and change my clothes. I'll be right back.